Cape Vincent held its annual French Festival with hundreds of people gathered for the event. 7 News reporter Gage Kilborn was able to learn about the community support, as well as give us a little bit of a history lesson.
On Saturday, Cape Vincent was bleeding red, white, and blue, but without the stars and stripes at the 55th French Festival. Hundreds of people showed up to this year's festival, as many considered it.
This is like the ultimate event of the whole entire summer, and if you're not here, like, you're missing out.
Alex Davis and Patrick Maloney grew up in Cape Vincent and have gone to numerous French festivals. Meanwhile, EKS Designs vendor Elizabeth Stewart is experiencing the festival for the first time.
There's so much festivity. It's such a family-friendly place. They have things for all ages going on.
One of the key parts of this festival is the community coming together.
Just having this many people in the town, it's got to be the best part of it.
With the community of Cape Vincent coming together for the 55th French Festival, it also reveals the culture of the town. The French explored the St. Lawrence River in the 17th century until they landed upon Cape Vincent, which was named after Frenchman Larey's son, Vincent. 400 years later, they still celebrate their heritage.
They celebrate this every year, being their French history and community.
Cape Vincent is looking to keep the tradition going to their 56th French Festival to continue celebrating liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Gage Kilborn, 7 News.